You're not welcome here anymore. From today, this house belongs to them." Those words didn't just strip away bricks and walls. They cut deeper than any blade. They weren't just about losing a place to sleep. They were about being erased, discarded, and betrayed by the very blood meant to protect. Betrayal has many faces, but when it wears the mask of family, the wound never fully heals. This is where the story begins, where trust shatters, dignity is tested, and boundaries are no longer optional. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I turned 67 last winter, and though most of my former colleagues still imagine me as the man in a hard hat pointing at bridge pylons with blueprints under my arm, these days my life is quieter. I was a civil engineer for more than 4 decades, building highways and bridges across Washington. Now my work is behind me, and I try to keep to simple routines that remind me the ground is still solid beneath my feet. Since Marion passed away 3 years ago, I've lived mostly in Tacoma, but whenever I need to breathe differently, I drive east to my villa on Lake Chelan. That house by Juniper Cove is more than lumber and stone. I built much of it myself, choosing beams with my own calloused hands, sanding the porch until the wood gleamed, and painting the trim the soft cream color Marion loved. Inside, every corner carries her fingerprints. The woven rug in the living room was one she picked up in Santa Fe. The bookshelf along the den wall still holds her novels arranged by season. Summer reads on the top shelf, winter mysteries below, and in the sunroom sits the rocking chair I shaped from oak planks, smoothed so carefully that her head would never rest against a rough edge. When I step into that villa, I don't feel alone. I feel accompanied by memories, by the warmth of a life we built together. Morning begins the same way whenever I stay there. I wake early, often before the sun crests over the ridge. I brew coffee in the old percolator that sputters and gurgles like a companion. Then I open the windows wide and let the pine scent sweep through the kitchen, mingling with the smell of fresh grounds. That quiet hour is when the world feels ordered again. I rinse mugs, wipe the counters, and check the porch railings. All small rituals that reassure me I still have some control. A man who spent decades calculating loads and stresses learns to appreciate details. If you neglect them, eventually a structure falters. I suppose people are not so different. My son Noah is 31 now. He lives on the west side, in Bellevue, with his wife Sabrina. She is sharp, ambitious, always dressed as if ready for a press conference. And she knows how to command a room with only a smile. Her parents, Victor and Lorraine Pierce, are fixtures at their table. Victor with his booming voice, and Lorraine with her polished manners, have a way of making every conversation tilt in their favor. I have tried to welcome them, though, truth be told, I often feel like an outsider when I'm around that circle. I gave Noah more than most fathers can. I paid his college tuition, bought him a car when his old one died, covered the deposit on his condo, and financed the wedding reception that Sabrina curated like a stage show. Each time I told myself the same thing: give enough, and maybe the ties will hold. Maybe Marion's vision of family gathered around a table would stay intact, but I've noticed a change in him over the years. He listens less, challenges more, and carries himself as though my part in his life is mostly financial. Perhaps it's the influence of his in-laws, perhaps it's just the arrogance of youth. Either way, I've felt the distance stretch. Still, I tried not to dwell on it. My villa remained untouched by those dynamics, a place where I could restore myself. Driving up through the Cascades, the road narrows between walls of pine. The air turns sharper, cooler, and when the lake appears, flat as glass, sky mirrored on its surface, I always feel my chest loosen. On summer mornings, the light spills across the water in a sheet of gold, and I think of Marion sitting beside me, her hair catching fire in that glow. I keep those images close, like beams supporting the weight of my solitude. That morning was no different. I left Tacoma before dawn, thermos filled, the car humming steady. The highway stretched long and straight, then curved into mountain passes where mist clung to the trees. When I finally turned onto the gravel path leading to Juniper Cove, the tires crunched with a sound I always loved. It meant I was arriving where silence welcomed me. I expected nothing more than to dust the furniture, patch a loose shingle, and perhaps read by the window until nightfall. I parked at the foot of the porch, taking in the familiar lines of the villa, the cedar siding glowing faintly, the deck I had stained just weeks earlier, the curtains Marian had sewn herself still hanging straight. Everything looked as it should, secure and unchallenged. I remember thinking, not without pride, that this house stood as proof of a lifetime's work and a marriage's devotion. In my mind, it was unassailable, immune from intrusion or dispute. I didn't yet know how quickly that belief would be tested. I didn't yet know that the people I trusted most would one day stand on this porch and declare it theirs. At that moment, I was simply a widower easing into another day of quiet labor, certain the world inside these walls belonged only to me and the woman I had loved. If you're still watching and this first chapter already strikes a nerve, comment number 1 below so I know you're here with me. Now, let's uncover what happens in chapter 2. The drive back to Lake Chelan that weekend felt like any other. The highway was steady beneath my tires, the summer light generous across the mountains, and the air carried that dry warmth that only eastern Washington seems to hold. I had planned for nothing more than a quiet few days, sanding porch rails, brewing coffee, and watching the lake shift from blue to copper as the sun set. It was the kind of trip I made often, unremarkable, restorative, a small way of keeping Marian close. But when I pulled into the gravel drive, something was wrong. The sound of laughter drifted through the pines before I even opened the car door. On the porch, in the very chairs I had built, sat Noah and Sabrina, glasses of wine in hand. Flanking them were Victor and Lorraine Pierce, Sabrina's parents, dressed as though for an evening garden party rather than a weekend at a lake villa. The sight stopped me cold. My villa, the place Marian and I had carved out of our lives, looked suddenly occupied, claimed. Noah rose first. He had my spare key in his hand, the one I'd given him years earlier when I thought trust was a simple gesture between father and son. He didn't smile, didn't stumble over excuses. He looked me square in the eye and said, "From today, this is my wife's family's home." The words fell without hesitation, as though rehearsed. For a moment, the lake behind us held the light like liquid gold, the scene almost serene, but everything inside me recoiled. Lorraine, in her polished shawl, set her glass down, directly on the wooden table I'd sanded and oiled last month. No coaster, no care. Victor leaned back in his chair, legs crossed with the ease of ownership, and nodded to me as if acknowledging a groundskeeper. Every small gesture cut deeper than the declaration itself. They weren't visiting. They believed they belonged. I didn't answer right away. Years in construction had taught me the value of silence. When a bridge groans, you listen before you act. I looked at my son. His posture was casual, too casual, like a man unveiling a finished deal. Sabrina's smirk confirmed what I already sensed. This was not spontaneous. This was orchestrated. My mind flickered to Marian. She had a way of holding her ground with a quiet ferocity. If she'd been alive, Noah wouldn't have dared speak half a sentence of what he had just said. The thought stung, but it also steadied me. I knew I couldn't let anger lead. Not here, not in front of them. "Enjoy your evening," I said finally, voice flat as steel. Then I turned, walked back to my car, and left them on the porch as though I were the guest intruding on their dinner. The drive back to Tacoma stretched longer than usual. The headlights cut through darkness that felt heavier with every mile. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me with its single porch light glowing, Marian's habit preserved. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt hollow. Inside, I set my bag down, but couldn't shake the echo of Noah's words. I poured coffee though the hour was late, sat in my study, and stared at Marian's photograph. The villa had always been our retreat, our proof that love could be built plank by plank. And now, my own son had tried to erase that history with one arrogant sentence. When my phone buzzed, I already knew it would be him. The message was short, cold. They'll be moving in Saturday. Don't come up. No room for discussion, no acknowledgement of ownership, just a command disguised as inevitability. I read it twice, each time feeling the foundation of our relationship crack further. I leaned back in my chair, fingers tightening around the coffee mug. Families don't take what's yours and tell you to stay away. Families don't replace your name with someone else's on the door of your own home. For years, I had said yes to every request, covering bills, writing checks, smoothing problems, to keep some vision of closeness alive. But that message made one truth clear. If I kept giving, there would be nothing left of me at all. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the worn engineer's notebook I hadn't touched since retirement. The pages smelled faintly of graphite and dust. On the first blank sheet, I wrote 3 lines in block letters. Don't negotiate from desperation. Control the information. Own the timing. They were principles that had guided multi-million-dollar projects, but tonight they felt like the only way to survive a different kind of collapse. I looked again at Marion's photo, her smile soft, knowing. You'd want me to handle this my way, I murmured. Outside, Tacoma was quiet, but inside me something solid had shifted. Noah believed his deadline gave him power. Saturday, they'd move in. He thought he had cornered me. What he didn't realize was that deadlines don't just create pressure, they create targets. And I had just decided to aim. If you feel the tension rising, and you're hooked by these twists, drop a number 2 in the comments to show you're still following. Now, let's dive straight into Chapter 3. The call came on a Wednesday evening, just as the sky over Tacoma dimmed into that gray-blue half-light. I had finished dinner, washed the dishes, and sat down with the paper when my phone buzzed. Noah's name glowed across the screen. I hesitated for a second, already bracing for the weight of his voice. When I answered, his tone was clipped, businesslike, as if I were a client rather than his father. Dad, let's not drag this out, he said. The villa is going to be Victor and Lorraine's home from now on. It's decided. I felt my jaw tighten. I kept my voice steady. Noah, you don't have the right to give away something that doesn't belong to you. He didn't even pause. You're old now. Alone. That place sits empty most of the year. Keeping it is selfish. They need it more than you. His words stung more than I expected. I had braced for arrogance, but not the cruelty of being reduced to age and solitude. For decades, I had built roads and bridges, worked sunup to sundown to give him an education, a stable home, opportunities he never lacked. And now he spoke as if I were nothing more than an obstacle, a tired man clinging to property I didn't deserve. I steadied my breath. The house is mine. Your mother and I built it with our hands and our money. You don't get to erase that because you've decided it's convenient. There was a pause, the faint crackle of the line, then his voice sharpened. If Mom were alive, she'd want me to do this. She'd want me to make sure everyone was taken care of. Something inside me flared hot. Don't you dare speak for your mother, I said, each word measured. She would never have allowed this conversation to go this far. The silence stretched. For the first time in years, I heard the uncertainty in him, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He muttered something about me being unreasonable, about how things were moving forward with or without me. Then I did something I had never done in my life. I ended the call first. The click of the line going dead was small, but it echoed in the quiet house like a hammer strike. I sat back in my chair, staring at the wood grain of the desk. Ending the call should have left me shaken, but instead it left me still, like the surface of Lake Chelan at dawn. I realized that whatever tie remained between father and son had been stretched to breaking. Noah no longer respected me as a man or as a parent. He saw me as a barrier, and barriers, in his mind, were meant to be pushed aside. The humiliation simmered into something else, resolve. If he thought I would collapse under insult, he had forgotten who I was. I had spent a lifetime dealing with stubborn contractors, city boards, and projects on the brink of collapse. I knew how to stand firm. I rose, poured a glass of water, and tried to calm the storm inside me. That was when my computer pinged. A new email. I almost ignored it, but the subject line caught me. Residential lease agreement. Juniper Cove Villa. My stomach knotted as I opened it. The sender was Sabrina. The attachment was a typed contract, several pages long, complete with signatures that looked digitally scanned. It listed Victor and Lorraine Pierce as tenants, with Noah and Sabrina as guarantors. The lease term, indefinite. At the bottom of the email was a single line of text. Dad, you can keep the name on the deed, but in practice, this home belongs to my family now. It's the right thing to do. I read it twice, my pulse pounding harder with each line. They hadn't just spoken their intentions. They were attempting to dress them in the language of legality to manufacture legitimacy where none existed. It was brazen, manipulative, and insulting. They had underestimated me badly. I hit print, listening to the hum of the machine as the pages slid out. The paper felt warm in my hand, like evidence straight from the forge. I gathered it with the transcript of Noah's text messages and clipped them together. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. They had chosen to escalate it into a battle of documents and ownership. I sat back down at the desk, staring at Marion's framed photograph. Her smile hadn't faded with the years. They think they can push me out, I whispered, but they don't know who they're up against. In that moment, I made a promise to myself. I would not be erased from my own home. If they wanted to drag me into a war of paperwork, manipulation, and arrogance, then I would fight on the terrain I knew best: planning, preparation, and the law. They thought of me as old and alone. What they had forgotten was that old men carry entire lifetimes of strategy, patience, and resolve, and I had just decided the fight had only begun. If these events are pulling you deeper into the storm, type number 3 in the comments so I know you're not leaving yet. Now, brace yourself as we step into Chapter 4. The night after I read Sabrina's so-called lease agreement, I sat in my study with the desk lamp casting its narrow circle across the papers. I'd spread out the deed, the tax receipts, the insurance statements, everything that tied Juniper Cove Villa to my name. For years, those documents had stayed locked away in a fireproof box, never once doubted, never once challenged. Now they felt like armor I needed to polish before battle. I kept my old engineer's notebook open beside them, the page with the 3 lines I had written in block letters staring back at me. Don't negotiate from desperation, control the information, own the timing. I repeated them under my breath until the words steadied me. I was not going to lash out in anger. I was not going to stumble into their trap. I would move with the patience of a man who had spent his life measuring twice before cutting once. Still, even patience needs allies. I scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years: Marcus Lee. Back when I was overseeing construction contracts, Marcus was the lawyer who saved my company from more than one frivolous lawsuit. He had the kind of mind that could turn statutes into weapons sharper than any blade. I pressed call, ... He answered in the same calm, clipped, and I remembered. After a few polite words, I told him everything. Not in the language of hurt or betrayal, but in the practical terms he would understand. Attempted property theft, falsified agreements, potential fraud. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "First thing, Graham, preserve every scrap of communication. Texts, emails, even voicemails. Print them, date them. That's your shield. Then bring me copies of the deed and insurance. We'll make this airtight." His advice, though expected, felt like a lifeline. The battle was no longer only in my heart. It had boundaries I could map, strategies I could follow. The next morning, I opened the safe in my bedroom closet. The metal was cool against my fingers as I pulled out the folder of original documents. Marion and I had signed those papers together. I could still picture her neat handwriting next to mine. I laid them carefully on the dining table and began to assemble a timeline. I printed Noah's arrogant texts, Sabrina's email with the fraudulent lease, and I clipped them together with neat labels. As the stack grew thicker, A strange sense of relief settled in. For the first time since this began, I wasn't powerless. I had proof. That afternoon, Noah called again. His voice was softer this time, almost casual, but the arrogance lingered underneath. "Dad, don't make this messy. Just cooperate, and it will all go smoothly." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "Messy didn't start with me, Noah. You chose this path, you and Sabrina." He gave a short laugh, like I was being dramatic. "We're trying to help everyone. Don't make it harder." "There's no harder," I said evenly. "There's only right and wrong, and you've crossed the line." The silence that followed was heavy. When the call ended, I realized we were further apart than ever. There would be no reconciliation in words, only in action. Later that evening, my inbox pinged again. Another message from Sabrina. I opened it with a sinking feeling, and sure enough, the attachment chilled me. It was another document, this time a rental authorization with what looked like my digital signature at the bottom. She had forged my name. The email read, "This confirms your agreement, Dad. We'll present it if necessary." My hands shook as I printed the pages, but the fury that rose wasn't the frantic kind. It was cold, precise. They were willing to falsify my identity to justify their theft. That wasn't family anymore. That was an opponent. I added the new document to the stack and slid the copies into a folder marked Evidence. Then I drafted a short note to Marcus, attaching the scanned files. I knew he had recognized the fraud for what it was. More importantly, he would know how to dismantle it. When the house was quiet again, I stood before the mantel where Marion's photograph rested. The picture showed her in the sunroom of the villa, light on her hair, her eyes crinkled with the smile she saved for me alone. I touched the frame gently. "I won't let them trample over you, Marion, or over what we built." The ache in my chest was sharp, but beneath it was something steadier. Resolve. I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. They had forced me into defense, but I would turn defense into offense. The villa was ours, and I would not surrender it to arrogance or forged documents. By the time I closed the safe again, sliding the evidence neatly inside, I felt like the foundation of my resolve was set. They thought I was too old, too isolated, too pliable, but they had forgotten the lessons of my life. Structures don't collapse if you know how to reinforce them. And I was ready to prove it. If you're still here and this story has you on edge, let me know by commenting number 4 below. Now, get ready. Chapter 5 is where everything explodes. By Saturday afternoon, the silence of Juniper Cove was broken by the grind of tires on gravel. From my office in Tacoma, I watched the live feed on my laptop. The villa's driveway camera showed Noah's SUV pulling up, followed closely by a rented moving truck. My heart clenched when I saw the rear doors swing open and a jumble of furniture, boxes, and suitcases spill into view. They weren't visiting. They were moving in. Victor stepped out in a pressed shirt, sleeves rolled high as though he was ready to work. Lorraine followed, carrying a bouquet of flowers like she was christening her new home. Sabrina barked orders, pointing toward the porch. And there was my son, standing tall, his face set like stone, unlocking the gate as though the place had belonged to him all along. I grabbed my keys. The drive from Tacoma felt shorter than usual, adrenaline making the highway blur past. By the time I reached the villa, neighbors had already started gathering. A couple from down the road leaned against their fence, whispering as the moving truck beeped in reverse. The sight of my villa, my Marion's villa, being treated like communal property snapped something inside me, but I held it steady. This had to be fought with control, not rage. I parked directly across the driveway, blocking the truck from unloading further. Stepping out, I could feel every eye on me. Noah was the first to notice. He marched down the porch steps, jaw tight, Sabrina trailing with her phone raised to record. "Dad," he said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "you're embarrassing yourself. This isn't your house anymore. It's our family's home now." I looked past him at the porch. Lorraine was already arranging her flowers on the railing. Victor had his hand on the doorknob like he was the host of some open house. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice calm, deliberate. This villa belongs to me. Here are the papers to prove it. I pulled a folder from under my arm and unfolded the deed, holding it where everyone could see. My name, clear and undeniable, stamped by the county clerk. "You step foot inside without my permission," I said, locking eyes with Victor. "You're trespassing." For a moment, there was silence. Then Sabrina laughed, shrill and cutting. "You're twisting things. This is about family, and you're abusing us. You want to hoard property while people who actually need it suffer." Her words were sharp, but they didn't cut the way she thought. They sounded desperate, almost rehearsed for the camera. She marched forward, Lorraine at her side, tugging at the door handle, the deadbolt held. I pulled my phone from my pocket. "The police will be here in minutes if you keep this up." That got them to pause, but only for a heartbeat. Suddenly Victor strode down the steps, fury in his face. In his hand glinted a set of keys. He held them up like a trophy. "We have the right to be here," he shouted, slamming one into the lock. The key scraped uselessly. The lock stayed firm. But my cameras caught every second. The angle, the sound, the futile rattle of metal against brass. A clear recording of attempted forced entry with fraudulent keys. Noah's face paled as he realized what was happening. He knew, as well as I did, that the footage was more than proof. It was ammunition. "You see," I said, raising my voice so the neighbors could hear, "every move you make is being documented. This isn't just drama anymore. This is evidence." Victor cursed, tossing the useless key into the gravel. Lorraine grabbed his arm, whispering frantically. Sabrina lowered her phone, suddenly less sure of herself. Even Noah's shoulders slumped, his confidence cracking under the weight of what they'd just exposed. I tucked the deed back into its folder and turned toward my car. "Everything you've done today will follow you into court," I said evenly. "You've made your intentions clear, and now, so have I." The crowd of neighbors stayed quiet, but I could feel their judgment filling the air. This wasn't a proud family moving into a retreat. It was a spectacle. 4 people caught, trying to take what was never theirs. I slid into my car and pulled away slowly, the crunch of gravel under my tires the only sound. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing in a cluster, anger written across their faces, but behind it, fear. For the first time, they realized I wasn't backing down. The conflict had erupted, full and public. There was no undoing it now. They had shown their hand, and I had shown mine. The battle for Juniper Cove had moved beyond whispered threats and private texts. It was open war, with evidence, witnesses, and stakes that none of us could walk away from unchanged. The drive back from Juniper Cove that night felt heavier than usual. The road wound along the water, headlights catching the silver shimmer of the lake. I kept replaying the scene, Noah's defiance, Sabrina's phone raised like a weapon, Victor rattling useless keys in the lock, while neighbors whispered from their fences. I had stopped them from moving in, but I knew it was only the first skirmish. They wouldn't quit after one failed attempt. Back home in Tacoma, I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was late. The house felt too quiet. I sat at my desk, staring at the folder of documents spread before me. I could pretend this was over, ignore them, hope the humiliation of being caught on camera would keep them away. But I knew better. If I did nothing, they'd come back smarter, maybe even with a lawyer who didn't care about truth. And those forged leases Sabrina had sent, they'd try to pass them off as real. The thought of Marion's photo in that villa, the rug we'd chosen together, the morning she brewed coffee with the windows open, it all hardened something inside me. If I stayed passive, I'd lose not just property, but the last living link to her. The next morning, I met Marcus Lee at his downtown office. He looked much the same as years before, neatly pressed suit, sharp eyes, steady handshake. We sat across a heavy oak desk, sunlight slicing through the half-drawn blinds. I handed him the folder of emails, text transcripts, and the printed photos from my security cameras. He leafed through them carefully, nodding. "You've done the right thing," he said. "You've documented every step. Now we use this to build a wall they can't climb." "What happens if I just wait it out?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands. They won't stop. They'll escalate. Forged documents, harassment, maybe even a bogus lawsuit to force your hand. The only way forward is to be proactive. File first. Protect the villa legally and permanently. I stared at the grain of his desk. I had always hated escalation, always chosen peace even when it cost me. But Marcus was right. This was no longer a family dispute. It was theft dressed as entitlement. I left his office with the decision still circling in my head, not quite settled, but heavier with each step toward the parking lot. That was when I saw it, a padded envelope leaning against the driver's side of my car. No postage, no return address, just my name scrawled in thick black marker. My pulse quickened. I tore it open. Inside was another set of papers, this one more elaborate than the fake lease Sabrina had sent. A deed transfer agreement, it said, with my name typed neatly on the grantor line, and at the bottom, in a signature block, was my name again, my handwriting, forged so perfectly it gave me chills. I stood frozen in the garage's stale air, the papers trembling in my hands. This wasn't carelessness, this was calculated. They weren't just bluffing anymore. They were preparing to walk into an office, wave forged documents, and try to strip me of everything. For a moment, the weight of it pressed down on me. I was 67, a widower. My son had turned against me, and his wife's family was willing to forge my very identity. The temptation to drop it all, to walk away, sell the villa, escape this ugliness, flickered through me. I could buy a smaller place, live quietly, let the storm die without me. But then I pictured Marion's smile, the way she leaned against the porch railing on summer nights, the sound of her laugh echoing across the lake. I pictured Noah as a boy, clutching my hand when he was scared of the dark, trusting me to protect him. And I realized surrender would mean betraying both of them, her memory and the better part of him that once existed. That night, I spread the forged deed alongside the other papers on my dining table. The pages glared up at me like a challenge. I sat down, hands clasped, and whispered to Marion's photo on the mantle, "If I walk away, they win. And if they win, everything we built becomes theirs to corrupt. I can't let that happen." I picked up my phone and called Marcus, even though it was late. He answered on the second ring. "I'm ready," I said. There was a pause, then his steady voice. "All right. We'll start the filings tomorrow. Once this begins, Graham, there's no turning back." "I don't want to turn back," I told him. "I want it finished." When I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. The choice had been made. No more hesitation, no more hoping Noah would come to his senses. From here forward, I would fight, not with shouting or keys jammed into locks, but with evidence, law, and the patience of a man who knew how to build foundations no storm could shake. I sat back, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For the first time since this nightmare began, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like resolve. If Chapter 6 made you feel the weight of that decision, write number 5 in the comments so I know you're keeping pace. Now, let's continue into Chapter 7. The days after the confrontation at the villa were marked by an uneasy quiet, the kind that makes you wonder if the eye of the storm has passed or if the worst is still gathering. I drove through Tacoma, trying to focus on errands and work around the house, but everywhere I went, I felt the weight of watchful eyes. Juniper Cove was a small community, and word had spread faster than wildfire. Neighbors began calling. Some asked with genuine concern, "Are you all right, Graham?" We heard Noah tried to take over the villa. Others called with thinly veiled curiosity, eager to hear gossip straight from the source. A few avoided me altogether, their polite waves across the street now replaced with quick glances and hushed conversations. The story had taken on a life of its own. The father who refused to share, the son who tried to claim what wasn't his. Meanwhile, Sabrina was busy on social media. Posts appeared on her profile, each crafted to paint me as a cold-hearted patriarch who abandoned his only child after his wife died. She never named me outright, but the insinuations were clear enough. Her friends chimed in with comments of sympathy, praising her for standing up to an unfair situation. Victor and Lorraine added fuel to the fire, telling anyone who would listen that they were just a simple couple seeking a stable home, unfairly pushed aside by a stubborn old man. I wanted to dismiss it all as noise, but the sting cut deep. To see lies dressed as truth spread across a digital stage made me realize this was no longer confined to my driveway or my villa. They were waging a public campaign, and I was the villain in their story. One evening, as I was reviewing documents in my study, my phone buzzed. It was Noah. His voice was sharp, brittle with frustration. "Dad, you've humiliated us," he snapped. "Everyone's talking. Do you have any idea what you've done to me, to my wife? You made us into a laughingstock." I took a breath before answering, forcing calm into my tone. "Noah, I didn't make you anything. You chose your actions. You brought furniture, cameras, and fake papers. Actions have consequences," he scoffed, his anger spilling through the line. "You're being selfish. You care more about a house than your own family." My voice hardened. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't try to steal. You crossed that line. Don't blame me for the fallout." There was silence, just his uneven breathing. Then, without another word, he hung up. The distance between us felt like a canyon that could no longer be bridged. The next morning, Marcus called. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Graham, something happened you need to know about. A document was submitted to the notary office downtown, a transfer of ownership for the villa." My stomach tightened. "Submitted?" "Yes. It carried what looked like your signature, but it was a forgery. The clerk recognized inconsistencies and rejected it immediately. I already have a copy in my possession. It's clear evidence of fraud. But Graham, this shows they're not bluffing anymore. They're testing the system, seeing if they can slip through unnoticed." I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. For all my preparation, hearing that they had actually attempted to push false papers through official channels felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just manipulation or intimidation. It was crime, plain and simple. "They've escalated," Marcus continued. "Which means we escalate too. We're going to file preemptive motions, solidify ownership under trust, and put notices on record. By the time they try again, the walls will already be built." When I hung up, I stared at the stack of documents on my desk. The forged deed Marcus had shown me, Sabrina's doctored lease, Noah's arrogant texts. They were no longer just insults. They were evidence in a case that had grown larger than my grief or my pride. For a moment, the betrayal threatened to overwhelm me. This was my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, now conspiring to erase me with paperwork and lies. The ache was sharp, but it didn't paralyze me anymore. The pain was transforming into something clearer, resolve. That night, rain drummed against the windows. I sat at the desk, Marion's photo beside me, her gentle smile steady as ever. I whispered into the quiet, "They think I'm weak. They think I'll fold, but this is the consequence of their choices, and I'll make sure they learn it." I realized then that this was no longer simply about protecting property. It was about defending my dignity, my legacy, the life Marion and I had built together. And I was ready to bear whatever storm came next, because I would not surrender what was rightfully mine. The fallout from the forged deed weighed on me like an anchor. I couldn't shake the image of some clerk at the courthouse turning over a paper with my name forged at the bottom. It was no longer just family betrayal, it was criminal intent. Every step I took around my house in Tacoma, every cup of coffee I brewed, carried that reminder. They were willing to erase me with a signature. Marcus called 2 days later, his voice calm but precise, the way it always was when he wanted me to understand the gravity of a situation. "We need to meet," he said. "There's a solution, but it requires you to think beyond the traditional idea of ownership." His office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, just as it always had. He laid out papers between us, a neat line of possibilities. "We can establish a trust," he explained, tapping one document, "or we can gift the villa to a non-profit, while you retain lifetime usage rights. Both options build a legal wall so high that no forged document, no bogus claim will ever climb over it. The idea struck me like a blade with two edges. To move the villa out of my name felt like surrendering a piece of myself, of Marion. Her laughter still lived in those walls, her presence in the wooden floors we had chosen, the curtains she'd insisted on sewing by hand. Putting it under a trust, or worse, into the hands of strangers, felt almost like erasing her. But then Marcus leaned back, his eyes steady on me. "This isn't about giving it up, Graham. This is about ensuring no one can take it. You'd still have access, control of usage, the right to walk through that door whenever you wish. But Noah and Sabrina? They'd find nothing to grab onto. No court, no notary would even consider their claims." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the documents, my chest tight with the weight of memory. For years, I'd carried Marion's presence like a fragile keepsake. Could I really bear to see her villa in another name, even if that name was a safeguard? Leaving his office, my mind spun with doubt. The late afternoon sun fell hard across the Tacoma streets, turning windshields into shards of glass. As I approached my car, something caught my eye, a plain white envelope tucked under the wiper blade. The handwriting was jagged, slanted in black ink. My pulse kicked as I slid it free. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just a single sentence scrawled in block letters. "If you don't hand over the villa, we'll expose every secret your family has." The words burned. It was a threat, not subtle, not clever, just raw intimidation. My hands tightened around the page, crumpling the edges. The desperation was clear. They were grasping at shadows now, but the fact that they had stooped to anonymous threats confirmed what I already knew. There was no line they wouldn't cross. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, the envelope trembling in my lap. The anger rose like a tide, but beneath it was something sharper, clarity. They weren't going to stop. Every day I hesitated gave them another chance to strike, another excuse to twist the story. That night, I spread all the documents across my dining room table. The deed, the fraudulent lease, the forged transfer, and now the crude letter. I lit a lamp and stared at them like battle maps. Somewhere, I could almost hear Marion's voice, steady and patient, whispering the same words she had once told me while we worked on home repairs. Sometimes protecting isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about putting things where no harm can reach them. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. She was right. Protecting her memory didn't mean clutching the villa in my own name. It meant ensuring it could never be tarnished by the greed of others. If it took a trust, or even a donation to a cause she believed in, then so be it. I picked up the phone and dialed Marcus. He answered quickly, as though he had been waiting. "We do it," I said. My voice was steady, sharper than it had been in months. "Move the villa into a trust. If there's a charitable option that honors Marion, even better. But we start now. I'm not leaving any opening for them." Marcus paused only long enough to let my decision settle. "Understood. I'll have the first drafts ready tomorrow morning. Once signed, the villa will be untouchable." I hung up and let the silence fill the room. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to relief. The decision was made. The battle wasn't over, but I had found my weapon, and it was stronger than any forged signature or whispered threat. I looked at Marion's picture on the mantel, her smile soft in the golden glow of the lamp. "They won't take this from us," I whispered. "Not ever." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. If Chapter 8 gave you chills with its revelations, comment number 6 below to let me know you're still watching. Now, prepare for the story's final act. The morning of the signing carried a strange kind of stillness. I woke before dawn, pulled on the gray suit Marion always said made me look like I meant every word I spoke, and drove into Tacoma. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized, but not from fear. For the first time in months, it was anticipation. Today the battle would end. Marcus met me in his office with his usual calm, a stack of documents aligned with surgical precision across the polished oak table. "Here it is," he said, sliding the top page toward me. The deed transfer, placing the villa into the Evergreen Veterans Trust. You retain lifetime usage rights, no exceptions. No claim from Noah, Sabrina, or anyone else will even get a hearing. I took a deep breath, the paper cool beneath my palm. Signing it felt like laying a cornerstone, final, immovable. When my pen scratched across the page, I knew the villa had been carried beyond the reach of greed. Marion's name echoed in my mind. I could almost hear her whisper, "Now it's safe." The sense of peace didn't last long. Marcus had arranged a meeting with the opposition to put an end to any lingering disputes. By mid-morning they arrived, Noah, pale but trying to look confident, Sabrina, chin high and phone clutched in her hand like a weapon, Victor and Lorraine trailing behind, dressed too formally, as if dignity could be ironed into clothes. They had even brought a lawyer, a young man with sharp shoes and nervous eyes. We sat across a long conference table. Marcus wasted no time. He pushed a set of certified copies into the center of the polished wood. "Here is the recorded transfer," he said. "As of yesterday, the Clearview Villa is the property of Evergreen Veterans Trust. Mr. Graham retains lifetime access. That means no one else has any claim, legal, financial, or familial. This matter is concluded." Sabrina's face flushed crimson. "You can't just give it away," she snapped. "That's generational property. Noah is his son. We have rights." Marcus didn't even glance at her. "No, you don't. Washington state law is clear. The transfer is irrevocable. You are not beneficiaries. You have no standing." Victor leaned forward, his voice oily. "We only wanted stability, a place to call home. This is cruel." I finally spoke, keeping my tone even. "What's cruel is forging documents. What's cruel is standing on my porch and telling me I wasn't welcome in my own home. This is the result of choices you made, not mine." Noah shifted uncomfortably. He avoided my eyes, staring instead at the papers in front of him. For the first time, he looked like a boy cornered by consequences he couldn't explain away. Then the twist came. Their lawyer, the young man in the sharp shoes, cleared his throat. "Mr. Lee," he said to Marcus, "may I see those documents?" Marcus handed them over. The lawyer scanned them quickly, then set them down with a sigh. "I need to be candid. I was not informed about any forged paperwork before being hired. I cannot, in good conscience, continue representing these clients. I'm withdrawing immediately." The room went silent. Sabrina's jaw dropped, Victor muttered under his breath, and Lorraine clutched her purse like it might save her. Noah finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with something close to panic. The collapse was complete. Their last line of defense had abandoned them. Sabrina turned on Noah. "You said this would work. You said your father wouldn't fight back." Her voice cracked, the fury edged with fear. Victor slammed a fist against the table, but it only made him look powerless. Lorraine whispered something about leaving, her face pale. I stayed seated, calm, watching them unravel. "This is what happens," I said softly, "when you build your future on lies. It crumbles." Noah stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the floor. "You've destroyed this family," he spat, though his voice lacked conviction. I met his gaze. "No, Noah. I enforced a boundary. Families survive boundaries. They die without them." With that, they filed out, angry, humiliated, broken. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway until only silence remained. Marcus gathered the remaining papers, tucking them neatly into a folder. He looked at me with the faintest smile. "You executed perfectly, Graham. They can shout, they can slander, but they can't touch the villa now." I rose, smoothing my suit jacket, and took the folder in hand. The weight of it felt nothing like the burden I'd carried for months. This was different, solid, final, liberating. Stepping outside, I drew in the crisp Tacoma air. The sky stretched wide, washed clean by morning light. For the first time since Noah had sat smugly on my porch, I felt free. The villa was beyond their reach. Marion's memory was intact, and my dignity was no longer under siege. I whispered to the sky as if Marion could still hear me. "It's over. We kept it safe." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. When I returned to Juniper Cove after the dust had settled, the villa felt different. It was no longer the site of tension or whispered threats. The air was lighter, the silence softer. For the first time in months, I walked through the front door without bracing for confrontation. The smell of cedar and lake air wrapped around me, a reminder that this place had always been more than property. It was memory, and it was healing. I moved from room to room, letting my hand brush against the furniture Marion had chosen. The curtains she had sewn, the photographs that still lined the mantel. The walls seemed to breathe again. No more forged papers, no more shouting voices demanding what was never theirs. The villa had been reclaimed, not just legally, but spiritually. Still, as I stood at the window overlooking the dock, my thoughts turned to Noah. I could still see him as a boy, chasing dragonflies along the shoreline, his laughter carrying across the water. Somewhere between that innocent child and the man who tried to strip me of my home, something had been lost. Perhaps ambition, perhaps influence, perhaps the simple truth of what family meant. The pain of his betrayal hadn't vanished with the signing of papers. It lingered, a bruise deep in the chest. Yet I found myself hoping, faintly, cautiously, that he might one day rediscover the part of himself that knew love without calculation. I was willing to leave the door open, but only if he came with respect, not demands. That evening, I sat at the dock, the water calm beneath a sky streaked with crimson. My phone buzzed once. A single message from Noah appeared on the screen. "When I'm ready to start over, I'll find you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A quiet smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, not out of triumph, but of recognition. Change was possible. The boy I once knew might still be inside the man who had wronged me. It was his journey now, not mine. As the sun slipped behind the ridge, I let my mind wander to the lessons of these months. A house is wood and stone, yes, but it carries the weight of the lives lived inside it. To protect it is not greed. It is to honor what was built with love and sacrifice. Marion's memory wasn't bound to a deed, but protecting the villa meant protecting the sanctuary she helped create. I also learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's surrender. For years, I had mistaken silence for peace, generosity for closeness. I gave, hoping Noah would see it as devotion. Instead, it taught him entitlement. Only when I drew a line did I begin to understand. Boundaries are not walls that divide families. They are foundations that allow them to stand. As night fell, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee warming my hands, watching the lake turn silver under the moon. I whispered to the air, to Marion, to myself. Life isn't about holding everything. It's about holding what's worth keeping. The villa was safe now, my dignity intact. And though my relationship with Noah was uncertain, I had faith that truth has a way of echoing longer than lies. In that quiet moment, I knew the fight had never been just about a house. It was about finding the courage to stop apologizing for being strong. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Closing reflection. There are moments in life when silence teaches more than words, when the weight of choices lingers far longer than the arguments that caused them. What begins as a battle over walls and windows often becomes something deeper, a reckoning with loyalty, respect, and the fragile threads that bind people together. Property can be rebuilt, money can be earned again, but the integrity to defend what is right cannot be restored once it is abandoned. In the face of betrayal, it is tempting to surrender for the sake of peace, to confuse compromise with love. Yet peace without respect is nothing more than a pause before the next wound. True love, whether between family or friends, cannot thrive without boundaries. Those lines drawn in quiet strength are not barriers to affection, but safeguards for dignity. They remind us that to give endlessly without expectation is not generosity, it is erasure. There is also a profound lesson in letting go. Sometimes the only way to preserve what matters most is not to cling tighter, but to place it beyond the reach of harm. Security is not always found in possession, but in purpose. When we align what we protect with values greater than ourselves, we transform loss into legacy. The storms of conflict often strip away illusions, leaving only what is essential. From that clarity comes the freedom to stand tall without apology, to say, this is worth keeping, this is who I am, and this is where I draw the line. The victory, in the end, is not in the defeat of others, but in the refusal to be diminished. And when the dust settles, what remains is not bitterness, but a steady calm, the quiet assurance that while betrayal may wound, resilience and truth will outlast it. That is the kind of inheritance no one can steal. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.